Renewable Energy Coalition, which is a network of 16 civil organizations in Pakistan.
This two-day summit is being organized under the banner of the coalition by our esteemed partner organizations, which include LUMS Energy Institute, the Sustainable Development Policy Institute, Renewables First, and the Policy Research Institute for Equitable Development.
For the next 2 days, ladies and gentlemen, we will explore the challenges and opportunities offered by energy transition. This summit serves as a platform to discuss, to debate, and to collaborate on innovative solutions which will shape our energy future.
We are privileged to have a diverse range of experts, policymakers, civil society activists, and industry leaders joining us to share their insights and experiences.
Ladies and gentlemen, now let's begin our proceedings officially. Please welcome Mr. Shahid Hussain, Rector, Lahore University of Management Sciences, for the inaugural address. Mr. Shahid Hussain is Rector and Trustee of LUMS. He also serves as CEO of Service Sales Corporation, one of the largest footwear business in Pakistan. Mr. Hussain is Chairman of Shahid Hussain Foundation, fostering the spirit of philanthropy and generosity through the various work he supports. Please welcome Mr. Shahid Hussain.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Dear participants, collaborating institutions, and our LUMS team, foreign dignitaries, delegates, welcome to the summit. LUMS is very grateful to all the institutions to have chosen this campus for this important subject. As we know, the world around is changing fast, and the energy debate is ever evolving. Our LUMS Energy Institute has been quite active, has done a lot of work in this area, and we are very sure that the two-day deliberations by all the experts from the region, partnering institutions, and our guests will add a lot of value, which will help the policymakers to make decisions for the coming years. So once again, thank you very much, and we look forward to the deliberations of the participants. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Hussain. Now, I would like to invite Dr. Ali Cheema, the Vice Chancellor of LUMS. He co-founded the Center for Economic Research in Pakistan and is a Senior Research Fellow at the Institute of Development and Economic Alternatives. Dr. Cheema, please.
Thank you. Welcome, guests, for this summit, which is, I think, on an issue which is going to define the future, not only of Pakistan, but of South Asia and the world. I'd like to echo Shahid Saab in what he said. And it's incredible to see a whole host of stakeholders to this question represented in this auditorium at the moment, and hopefully over the 2 days, including senior policymakers. So this is an opportunity for a very, very robust debate. I think what's really important, and I just want to make or highlight 2 or 3 issues, that the paper that was circulated as the outline for this conference basically laid out the structure really well and pointed to 2 big challenges. The first is the challenge of climate vulnerability, which is very integrally tied to the question of the energy transition. 60% of global fossil fuel emissions and the effect it's having is emanating from the region, although Pakistan is not a major player in that. But actually where Pakistan gets the brunt of what is dished out is in the form of climate vulnerability. And it wouldn't be an exaggeration to say that Pakistan is now ground zero on the climate crisis of the world. And so basically, there couldn't be a better place or a better location to initiate this debate. The outline also lays out three crises. There is the crisis of access to energy, which is an important crisis. It's a regional crisis, including in India and in Bangladesh. We've recently heard news about India disruptive its power agreements within Bangladesh, and that's going to have a huge effect on access. The second big issue that is there is that of environmental vulnerability, with countries in the region being exposed to floods, to droughts, and indeed to adverse productivity effects, because the certainties of yesteryear for agriculture are no longer certainties for the future. And I think that is really important to take into account. But there's a third dimension, which is a very Pakistani dimension. And Pakistanis always add their own dimension. We take pride in that. And that dimension is that of cost unaffordability. So in Pakistan, the big challenge is also of energy costs. So we did a back of the envelope calculation. And if you look at the energy cost as a proportion of the income of an average householder in Dhaka or in Delhi, it comes to about 20%. But when you do the same metric for an average Pakistani, it comes to about 65%. And that is just not sustainable. In fact, if you look at the rate at which the cost is growing, Pakistan has one of the highest or fastest rates of increase of per unit electricity costs in the world. So in Pakistan, the energy question is also very integrally linked to the affordability question. And I think that's the extra dimension that we truly need to worry about. Now, where this kind of thing meets, and I think it gives us a direction, is getting out of a structure that is heavily dependent on fossil fuels for all the price risks and the cost risks that it brings with it, is also going to have an impact on climate, and it's also going to have an impact on affordability. So how do we think together? And the structure of the conference presents a multi-sectoral approach. And I think that is what is needed, although it emphasizes climate finance, but I think it also touches upon two other dimensions which are critical. The first is adoption of mitigation and conservation measures. I know the Energy Institute and Fayaz Saab and his team are doing incredible work on how do we make demand or structure demand in a way which actually makes energy use efficient, which is to do with built structures. How do we plan our cities and an infrastructure? That question gets linked. And the last thing which is there, which I think is extremely important, is also how do we bring about the regulatory incentives in addition to the financing. I think that is extremely important, because unless the regulatory structures change, none of these things are going to materialize. So I look forward to the deliberations, and it's really exciting to see such an exciting group. Finally, I'd like to thank all the institutions. I think it's an incredible job. I think if you're going to have a national impact as academics, we have to come together. And I, for one, would really be completely behind further coalitional efforts to get the message out. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Cheema, for your inspiring words. We will officially begin our day by inviting Mr. Muhammad Mustafa Amjad, the chair of Pakistan Renewable Energy Coalition and the program director at Renewables First, to present the background and the objectives of the summit.
Thank you so much, Amara. Honorable dignitaries, respected guests, ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much on behalf of the organizers, the Pakistan Renewable Energy Coalition, LUMS Energy Institute, PRIDE, RF, and STPI, for joining us today at this inaugural Energy Summit. That was something that is very close to all of our organizations. This is something that we all strive for, we work for. This is what we live, essentially. And we wanted to bring these conversations that we have across borders into Pakistan. Because as Dr. Ali Cheema rightly pointed out, we've been having these conversations, but the challenges are very nuanced, specifically for the region, but also for Pakistan. And when we talk about global energy transition, the last Conference of Parties was a very marked occasion where we finally got a call out on moving away from fossil fuel and calling on countries to accelerate energy transitions across the globe. But the challenge for the 60% of the global population that is housed in Asia is very different than those that are housing in other parts of the world. These challenges look very different in terms of development, in terms of financing, in terms of the environment in general, but also the impacts of climate change that are materializing for Pakistan more so than a few other countries. And over the past couple of years, we've seen some amazing climate catastrophes, the likes of which haven't happened in the past few decades. And Pakistan has been suffering on that front. Yet the ambition remains, yet we want to work towards decarbonizing, not because on the environmental front it makes a lot of sense, but as Dr. Cheema rightly pointed out, decarbonization is now an environmental and an economic challenge. If Pakistan wants to bring down the costs of electricity, if we want to accelerate our energy usage and improve the demand and supply challenges, then we have to incorporate greater renewable energy into the mix. And this is kind of what we as a collective, the Pakistan Renewable Energy Coalition, is working towards. We started our work back in 2021 with the aim of accelerating the energy transition, adding more renewables to the grid. And what started as a few organizations, we're almost 16 organizations now. And we deal with all kinds of challenges when it comes to the power sector of Pakistan. We have Lums Energy Institute, STPI, we have local partners that are doing a lot of the work on the ground, tackling regional challenges in Balochistan and Sindh, working with communities to mitigate the impacts of climate change, to mainstream adaptation measures. And as a collective, what we want to achieve out of this conference is to continue having those conversations at a more local scale, but also learning from experiences from other parts of Asia. Because at the end of the day, the challenges of Asia, while are very unique, yet they remain scalable. There's a lot of opportunity for us to learn amongst peers and to also come up with solutions as a collective. Collective action remains the main focus of this conference. And on that note, I'd like to also do a quick run through of the agenda. I'll be doing this every day to kind of make sure that we are all on the same page so that we can get an idea of why we are having these sessions. So the way we've structured this conference is we divided it over 2 days. The first day is all about taking a stock take of what we have achieved as a region. So we'll be starting off right after this with a plenary where will be challenges, and we'll be evaluating the progress and challenges in Asia's energy transition. We'll have perspectives from India, we'll have perspective from China, from Pakistan, and then from the Southeast Asia, followed by a Q&A session moderated by Dr. Naveed Arshad. In the second half, right after this plenary, we also have a keynote address from Climate Policy Initiative, who will be highlighting the global landscape of climate finance for the last year, focusing particularly on the Asian region. Then we'll break out for lunch, and post-lunch we have a couple of parallel sessions planned. The panel 1 will happen in this room, while panel 2 will happen in the room right across the hall. The first panel will be talking about financing energy transition, while the second one will be talking about the important role of energy efficiency and conservation in driving the energy transition. Post this session, we'll have a group activity where the idea is to see as a collective where we stand as a region in terms of driving the energy transition. So we'll be doing an opportunities and challenges analysis. We'll be dividing ourselves into 3 groups, where the first group will be talking about financing through multilateral development banks. The second one will be talking about renewable energy specifically, while the third group will be debating about energy efficiency finance. This will be followed by a tea break, after which we'll be back in this plenary And we'll be targeting a conversation around the role of policy making and policymakers in driving energy transition. So we have a panel which comprises of different regional perspectives from within Pakistan, which will be followed by special remarks by the Federal Minister for Energy Power Division, Mr. Wais Ahmed Khan Lagari, and a question and answer session right afterwards. So the way we've structured this is to make sure that today we have all of those conversations, which give us a good idea of where we stand as a collective. And tomorrow we'll try to come up with more solutions. So we'll be discussing the important role of integrated energy planning. We'll be discussing the opportunities of early retirement. We'll be having conversations around financing, energy efficiency and energy transition in general, while also discussing the important caveats of demand and supply and the planning required for such a transition to happen. We'll also be building towards the Conference of Parties scheduled for next month. So as an output of the conference, we aim to come up with a charter of demand that will be structured from the discussions that we have as a collective during our 2 days. We have a couple of group activities planned. So those group activities will allow us to feed into the charter of demand. And we would try to use whatever the collective wisdom of this room is to come up with a set of demands for the region that could then be fed into the COP process in the next month. So on that note, again, I'd like to thank you all for gracing us with your presence. This is indeed some very important conversations that have been missing from the Pakistani landscape. But they need to be mainstream, they need to be had, and they need to be prioritized. And that is exactly what we are doing today at LUMS and tomorrow. So please, thank you again for joining us, and we look forward to your active participation. Thank you.
Thank you, Mustafa, for setting the stage for day one of our summit. So before we move forward with our speakers today, we think it is imperative that we set some norms before commencing our session to facilitate our speakers, our panelists, and our audience. We would like to request the speakers and panelists to remain well within the time limit and refrain from speaking over others. To ensure a smooth flow of the agenda, we have designated timekeepers whom the speakers can look to for keeping track of time. Those who have a question, kindly raise your hand and ensure that it is relevant and precise. From our end, we will ensure that the sessions are conducted in a timely manner so as to keep our agenda on track and give our audience their due time to network and rest. Let's create an inclusive and respectful space for a productive discourse.
Ladies and gentlemen, now we would like to call upon stage our first keynote speaker, Mr. Jameel Ahmed, Governor of the State Bank of Pakistan. With over 31 years of experience at the State Bank of Pakistan and Saudi Central Bank, his expertise includes monetary policy, banking supervision, and financial regulation. Please welcome Mr. Jameel Ahmed.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Dr. Ali Chima Sahib, Vice Chancellor LUMS, Razak Daud Sahib, Honorable Professors, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. Assalamu alaikum and a very good morning. It is a matter of great pleasure for me to be part of the first ever Asia's Energy Transition Summit. I extend my heartfelt appreciation to the Pakistan Renewable Energy Coalition, LUMS and its partners for organizing this summit on a topic of global concern and of special relevance for developing Asian economies. With many sustainable energy experts in attendance today, I am hopeful that this conference will help to chart out pragmatic solutions towards a green and safe future for our country and planet. As we are all aware, climate change is one of the most pressing issues facing the world today. It is causing extreme weather events that result in loss of lives, livelihoods, and critical infrastructure at an increasing frequency. Unpredictable weather events also pose substantial macroeconomic risks by destroying
output of essential agriculture commodities, including food crops. These events also disrupt supply chain linkages, contribute to economic uncertainty, and also create additional challenges in achieving sustainable economic growth. It is therefore important for countries to adopt an all-encompassing policy approach to reduce their carbon footprint and thereby slow down and eventually reverse the harmful impacts of climate change. With this background, today I will touch upon three main themes. First, the progress on clean energy transition made globally as well as in Pakistan. Second, the opportunities as well as challenges faced by Pakistan in pursuing the much needed transition towards clean energy. And third, the role of stakeholders, including the government, central bank, international financial institutions, and private sector, in taking the agenda for sustainable development forward from here on. Ladies and gentlemen, I am sure you are all aware that Pakistan is among the top 10 countries most vulnerable to the climate change. Yet we are contributing negligibly to the factors that are fueling it. Despite this, Pakistan has committed to unconditionally reduce its overall projected emissions by 15% by 2030. We have also committed to reduce emissions by a further 35%, conditional on the availability of required external financing. To achieve the emissions targets by 2030, Pakistan has planned to generate 60% of all energy from renewable sources. In spite of significant macroeconomic challenges over the past couple of years, we have made important strides towards sustainable energy transition. In fact, Pakistan already stands at a comparatively cleaner position relative to other Asian and low and middle income economies in terms of the overall energy mix. Moreover, we are also transitioning away from fossil fuels at a faster rate than many regional economies. According to global data compiled by the Energy Institute, the share of fossil fuels in Pakistan's overall energy consumption has declined by 4.8 percentage points from 86.7% in 2019 to 81.9% in 2023. In the same period, the average share of fossil fuels in Asian countries declined from 88% to 85.6%, a decline of 2.4 percentage points. Meanwhile, for low and middle income countries, the drop in share was even lower, just 0.8 percentage points from 90.8% to 90%. Having said this, we know that we need to do a lot more to bring down our collective carbon footprint and achieve the emissions targets. We believe this is important for achieving sustainable growth in future. Ladies and gentlemen, this brings me to the second theme of my speech about the opportunities as well as challenges that are faced by Pakistan in pursuing the transition towards cleaner energy. In terms of opportunities, there is tremendous availability of natural resources, especially solar, hydropower, and wind in Pakistan to gradually steer our energy mix towards cleaner sources. According to a widely cited World Bank study, utilizing less than 0.1% of the country's available area for solar power would meet Pakistan's current total electricity demand. Apart from solar, wind resource is also considerable in the country, especially in parts of Balochistan and Sindh. At the same time, however, there are some major challenges that limit our ability to utilize the available potential of clean energy sources and phase out existing fossil fuel-based energy generation. First, the cost of undertaking the clean energy transition is quite substantial. For Pakistan, it runs into billions of dollars annually for many years. The cost relates to development and upgradation of infrastructure, such as hydropower plants, transmission systems, and so on, as well as to phase out existing fossil fuel-based power plants. Second, the constrained fiscal envelope limits the government's ability to undertake the needed magnitude of investments into building resilience against climate change and to transition towards cleaner energy. The elevated budgetary borrowing requirement also leaves less space for the private sector to borrow for commercially viable clean energy projects. Third, countries most at risk from climate change already have high debt levels. In fact, 28 of the countries that are most vulnerable to climate change are assessed by the UNDP to be in debt distress. This discourages investors, especially foreign institutional investors, from providing much needed capital to these countries to undertake the required energy transition. And fourth, developing countries today need to arrange funds to finance this energy transition, while suffering output losses due to changing weather patterns at the same time. These output losses lead to an increase in demand for imports to stabilize domestic supplies. This in turn leads to external account pressures for many emerging markets at a time when access to global markets is already constrained for many of these countries. You may also recall the sizable impact of devastating floods that had struck Pakistan in 2022 at a time when the country was already experiencing challenges in macroeconomic environment. Ladies and gentlemen, this brings me to the final theme of my talk about what each of us present here today needs to do to facilitate the much needed energy transition in our country. First, macroeconomic stability is a paramount importance for sustained economic growth and energy transition. In this regard, State Bank and the government of Pakistan have been focused on stabilization measures over the past couple of years, which are now yielding the desired results. Going forward, there is a need to focus on structural reforms to expand the overall fiscal envelope. This will also create more space for the private sector to borrow at a feasible terms to undertake the needful investment. Second, Pakistan needs to effectively tap the available international climate financing options. The IMF, World Bank, Asian Development Bank, and Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank all have expressed their eagerness in facilitating the global energy transition, especially for developing countries. These global institutions are uniquely positioned to support governments in designing feasible clean energy projects and develop financial products with the required safeguards for private investors. In this regard, IMF's Resilience and Sustainability Fund, IMF's Resilience and Sustainability Trust, and the ADB's Energy Transition Mechanism are two facilities aimed at supporting emerging economies in their efforts to build resilience against climate change. On the home front, the ongoing macroeconomic stability is a welcome development to attract foreign investment. At the same time, there is a need to actively work on designing commercially viable projects and explore retiring existing fossil fuel-based projects. Such endeavors may result in concessional external financing from multilateral partners as well as foreign institutional investors. Third, the domestic policy environment needs to be more conducive for setting up of clean energy projects and for development of domestic financial markets for sustainable investment. In this regard, SBP has undertaken a number of initiatives. In 2016, we introduced a revised financing scheme for renewable energy with a total outlay of 104 billion rupees, which capped the maximum interest rate chargeable to borrowers at 6%. SBP also issued the Environmental and Social Risk Management Implementation Manual in 2022 for the banking sector. This manual is intended to facilitate banks in integrating environmental risks in their overall credit assessment exercise. Further, SBP is currently developing national green finance taxonomy in collaboration with World Bank. This flagship project will define green economic activities in priority sectors with respect to climate change. Moreover, the Securities and Exchange Commission of Pakistan has approved national guidelines for the issuance of green bond or sukuk financing by the corporate sector. And fourth, the private sector, backed by sound technical advice from experts, will need to wholeheartedly come on board for the clean energy agenda. While undertaking capacity expansion or new greenfield projects, the private sector should also consider environmental sustainability concerns and plan accordingly. This will also allow it to potentially raise external financing from institutional investors looking to finance greenfield projects. Ladies and gentlemen, in the end, I assure you that at the State Bank of Pakistan, we are determined to developing a climate-driven central banking framework that is synchronized with all stakeholders in pursuit of a green energy transition. This is also at par with overall adaptability and climate change mitigation measures. To achieve these objectives, certainly we require institutional capacity building and collaboration, especially via events like today. These efforts will need to be showed up by the needed investment in research and development by both the public and private sectors. From the policy-making perspective, there is a need for clear-cut targets and timelines for decarbonization across the manufacturing and agriculture supply chains. Lastly, the overall policy and regulatory framework should be focused towards incentivizing the transition towards green energy. In conclusion, I would like to extend my gratitude to the organizers for organizing this event and for inviting me to speak at this summit. With that, I thank you for your time and look forward to the rest of the informative and insightful sessions today. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Ahmed, for enlightening us with such in-depth analysis of climate finance and private sector financing for energy transition. So up next, we are scheduled to hear from His Excellency Khizr Farhadov, the Ambassador of Azerbaijan to Pakistan. He has over 2 decades of diplomatic experience, having served in key roles across various departments of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, including counselor in Saudi Arabia and South Korea, and director of the First Asia Department at the Azerbaijani Ministry of Foreign Affairs. He has also served as ambassador at large and held various positions in the ministry. Unfortunately, he could not join us in person, but he has sent us a video message. So if we can please have that on screen.
Ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests, dear organizers, I extend my warmest greetings to all of you. It is with a heavy heart that I express my regret for not being able to attend this remarkable event in person due to the unavoidable engagements. However, I am deeply honored to have the opportunity to address you, even from afar. The impacts of climate change are increasingly evident. Greenhouse gas emissions from human activities have led to unprecedented heat waves, prolonged droughts, devastating floods, and other extreme weather events disrupting the planet's climate balance and affecting nations worldwide. Climate challenges demand urgent and unified actions from all countries. Climate finance will be an important part of the negotiations at COP29. We are listening to all parties to understand their expectations and help them refine potential landing zones based on a shared vision of success so that we can deliver a fair and ambitious new goal. The COP29 presidency is also working with a wide range of actors from multilateral financial institutions, the private sector, the financial services industry, and philanthropy to unlock climate finance and deliver the multiples we need. We need the financial service industry to deepen green capital markets that will enable us to create viable economic models for climate positive action to make sure that protecting the planet pays. This will also be needed to channel resources to the developing world. Climate adaptation and loss and damage will be critical to global response to climate change. As part of that collaboration, we are working together within Troika presidencies to significantly enhance international cooperation and international enabling environment to stimulate ambitions in the next round of NDC. Azerbaijan will run an inclusive COP to address everyone's priorities for inclusive outcomes. Azerbaijan is experienced in running inclusive multilateral diplomacy, most notably through its recent chairmanship of the non-aligned movement and its efforts to ensure that everyone's voices were heard and their interests represented. As COP29 host, Azerbaijan leads by example as we have put climate action into the heart of our national plans. Azerbaijan has made green growth one of key priorities of development. President of Azerbaijan declared 2024 as Year of Solidarity for a Green World to foster momentum on climate action at a national level and beyond. Today, Azerbaijan is a regional leader in green energy transition. In the recent years, we have been prioritizing green projects all over the country. We are developing smart cities and villages in the liberated territories. Karabakh and East Zangezur economic zones, Nakhchivan Autonomous Republic, will be net zero emission zones by 2050. By 2030, the share of renewables in the installed capacity of electricity generation in Azerbaijan will reach 30%. At the end, I would like to assure you that COP29 will be one of the largest and most important international events in 2024. We look forward to the support from friendly countries like brotherly Pakistan in forging a consensus in Baku COP29. Only through our collective efforts we can address the climate challenges and safeguard our ecosystem for future generations. Thank you very much for your attention.
Ladies and gentlemen, now it's time for our first plenary session where we will be exploring progress and challenges of Asia's energy transition. I would like to call our first speaker, Mr. Shirish S. Garud, who has joined us online from India. Mr. Shirish is consultant and ex-director at the Energy and Resources Institute, TERI, Delhi. He has more than 3 decades of experience in renewable energy sector. He has spearheaded many international projects on energy planning and renewable energy. Please welcome Mr. Shirish.
Hello, am I audible?
Yes, sir, we can hear you.
Yeah, thank you. First of all, I distinguished guest participants and organizer Pakistan's Renewable Energy Coalition. A very good morning to one and all. On the onset, I would like to express my sincere thanks to the organizers and especially Mr. Ubaidur Rahman Zia, Head of Energy Unit, SDPI, and Mr. Asad Mahmood and Ms. Saira Adnan for coordinating and giving me this opportunity. This summit is happening at an appropriate time as we look forward to and plan for COP29 happening in a couple of months. Climate change has already become a global emergency, as mentioned by earlier speakers, with increasing frequency of climate disasters happening across the globe, and window for the action to combat climate change is rapidly closing. At the same time, the global south, including South Asia, is facing challenges of equitable and just development, meeting sustainable development challenges and goals, and achieving economic growth to improve quality of life for all. With the energy sector responsible for around 60 to 80% of human-caused greenhouse gas emissions, the shift to clean renewable resources is critical, and to mitigate the climate change and advance sustainable development. This involves replacing fossil fuels with renewable energy technologies, supporting access to clean cooking and fuels and technologies, and improving energy efficiency and electrification across all sectors. Combating climate change while maintaining equitable and just development focus is way forward for sustainable development. As mentioned, the COP28 has identified 3 key areas. One is renewable energy transition, which we will be discussing in detail, primarily looking at tripling the renewable energy contribution in overall energy use by 2030. Transitioning away from fossil fuels. This involves development of biofuels, the bio-CNG, and agro-based or solid waste-based fuels, and improving energy efficiency and conservation overall across the sectors. I think the access to technology as competitive price costs and climate finance are 2 key enabling factors apart from regional cooperation, which is an important aspect for international global efforts. If we take a short overview of the South Asia, now we have almost 25% of the global population residing in South Asia, and this basically is across the primarily with India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, and then we have Nepal, Sri Lanka, Afghanistan, and Mauritius. The region is one of the fastest growing region in Asia in terms of the economic development, and it is also looking at meeting its requirement of energy, which are increasing by renewable energy. With diverse geographical features such as glaciers, deserts, grasslands, variety of climates, and proximity to seacoast, our region has large avenues for growth in renewables. We have, in different parts of the region, we have different renewable energy resources. For example, hydro is more prominent in Hindu Kush and in Sri Lanka also. The geothermal is available in Afghanistan, Pakistan, parts of Pakistan. Solar is primarily in India. Solar wind in Sri Lanka also. The challenge so we have, and entire region is primarily biomass based or agriculture based economy, so we have abundant resources of agriculture waste and biomass which can be used to tackle the the challenges of alternate fuels. The region has witnessed energy demand growth of more than 50% since 2000 in last 24 years. In particular, electricity demand in Bangladesh, Bhutan, India, Nepal, and Sri Lanka has grown on average by more than 5% annually over past 2 decades and is expected to more than double by 2050. But at the same time, around 2/3 of our energy use is imported, and we are heavily dependent on fossil fuel, which accounts for about 80% of total primary energy production in the region. With this background, I would like to now focus on some of the country requirements. For example, in Sri Lanka, the Vision 2021 is providing energy security, development, and welfare, and projected requirement is about 200 gigawatt of renewable energy by 2050, with huge RE potential of solar about 160 gigawatt and wind about 150 gigawatt is available. In Bhutan, we already have huge hydropower development, and the country practically gets all its energy through hydropower with 2,200 odd installed hydropower capacity, and a majority of it is exported to India. ADB also has announced $30 million loan funding for distributed solar for public infrastructure, and with 35 megawatt of distributed solar installations to be done in next 5 years. The government has also set a target to generate 500 megawatt of solar energy by 2025 and 1,000 megawatt by 2030. In case of Nepal, it has a huge hydro potential compared to its requirement, and about 83 gigawatt hydro potential, and out of which economically available potential is about 42 gigawatt, and this is huge compared to their requirement, and this can be tapped by neighboring countries for electricity, renewable electricity requirement. The best part of the available hydro potential is that hydro generally in Bhutan and Nepal, they come to almost standstill during winter season because of freezing of the rivers, whereas the other countries can provide solar or wind generated electricity to them. And as far as India is concerned, we have now about 449 gigawatt installed capacity, out of which almost 25 to 30% is renewable energy based, including large hydro. And we have set our NDC target of 500 gigawatt of renewable energy by 2030, and we are well on the that to meet the target. We also have enacted an Energy Conservation Act since 2001, and there are 3-4 different important schemes which have resulted into major energy conservation efforts. One is we have established the Bureau of Energy Efficiency as a part of the Energy Conservation Act, and this has run many programs. I just want to highlight 3 of them. One is the Perform, Achieve and Trade scheme, PAT scheme, where energy efficiency certificates are generated by the energy intensive industries, and this scheme is aimed to achieve energy reduction in energy intensive industries, and designed on the concept of reduction in specific energy consumption for product. And so far, 8 cycles covering 13 sectors and more than 1,333 industries, resulting in avoiding 110 million tons of CO2 emissions, have been achieved as a part of the PAT scheme. The second important scheme is standardizing and labeling scheme, where star labeling, star rating is given for appliances. Started with air conditioner, which is highest energy consuming appliance in the residential sector, then followed by refrigerator, and currently there are 38 appliances under star labeling scheme. Out of that, 16 are mandatory and 22 are voluntary. We have achieved almost 81 billion unit saving in 22-23 alone, and reduction of 58.9 million tons of carbon dioxide emissions because of energy conservations. third energy conservation scheme or energy is Ujala scheme, where we have promoted LED light bulbs with bulk procurement strategy, so that the cost has come down substantially, and we have about 370 million LED light bulbs distributed across the country, and about 7.2 million LED light tubes by Energy Efficiency Services Limited, which is the company established under the Bureau of Energy Efficiency. So apart from these three schemes on energy conservation, there is overall, promotion of energy audits, energy service companies, and other efforts. So as a government, we are basically committed to achieve the renewable energy and energy efficiency targets, and we have now about 22% of our electricity generation coming through renewables, which is quite substantial. And on international front, I would like to take a couple of your minutes so we have agreement on electric power trade, cross-border transmission, interconnection, and grid connectivity between India and Nepal since 2014. The couple of hydropower plant are under construction in Nepal, which is being implemented by wholly owned subsidiary of Indian company. And there are about 11.2 gigawatt projects at various stage of planning in Nepal and under Indian cooperation. We have also signed an agreement for purchase of 10,000 megawatt hydropower from Nepal in next 10 years. So that will give boost to the hydropower sector and also the overall development of Nepal in coming years. In Bhutan, we have now about power transfer through 15 interconnections. About 1948 megawatt is being transferred from Bhutan to India, and vice versa. During winter time, we supply power to Bhutan. Currently in Bangladesh, we have transmission capacity of 1160 megawatt between India and Bangladesh, which is fully booked, and another 765 kilowatt DC power cross-border link has been agreed for implementation. And we have, dedicated plant in India, which is supplying power to Bangladesh directly without using Indian grid. So as far as Sri Lanka is concerned, it is basically island country but close to India, and there is a understanding and MOU to develop a DPR for high voltage DC overhead link between Madurai, part of India, to Mannar, part of Sri Lanka, for 2 into 500 megawatt HVDC terminal based on voltage source converter technology. This DPR has been prepared, and there is India is also looking at Trincomalee Power Company Limited and NTPC and of India and Ceylon Sri Lanka Electricity Board have joint venture in developing 50 megawatt, which can be extended to 135 megawatt solar power in Sri Lanka. This link is very important because it will give access for Sri Lankan grid to exchange energy not only with India but also with other South Asian countries. As mentioned, we already have BBIN, Bhutan, Bangladesh, India, and Nepal interconnection. Grid interconnection, and Sri Lanka can be added to that, and it can sell its surplus power during off-peak demand scenarios to other countries in South Asian region. So to enable rapid regional cooperation and development, we need to have a good regulatory framework, which is, uniform across the countries. Financial resources, as mentioned in earlier lectures, the financial resources are very important, and also the infrastructure development for grid stability and grid monitoring and grid data analysis. So in grid infrastructure stability is also very important aspect. So way forward, I can look at electrification of end-use applications and greening of power generation is primary requirement for renewable energy trading country. Effective grid integration with all types of renewable generation to reduce renewable generation variability and intermittent supply issues. Strengthening of infrastructure within and across countries to ensure absorption of flexible renewable supply. We also need to promote manufacturing of renewable generation equipment to reduce import dependency on renewable machineries. We in India have initiated this through production link incentive schemes and other schemes for giving government support. Development of regional database to carry out proper economic cost of power trade in region is an important aspect. A regional trade can reduce need and dependence on storage because of the diversity of generation and demand. As I mentioned earlier, hydropower, wind power, and solar power complement each other in the region, and if we can explore the geothermal power resources, which can act as a base load for scenario for the international grid, I think that will be a very big boost for use of renewables in the South Asia region. We need to have access to international funding like Climate Fund and Clean Energy Fund for promotion of renewable generation and transmission, which can play an important role. I will stop here, and again, thank you very much for your time and the opportunity given. And I hope I have, given a quick overview of the power situation in the region. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Garud, for your valuable insights on Asia's RE acceleration. Please stay with us online. We will have a question and answer session soon after this plenary session. Ladies and gentlemen, now I would like to invite Dr. Christoph Nedopel Wong. He is Director of Griffith Asia Institute and a visiting professor at FISF Fudan University, Shanghai, as well as at the Singapore Management University. His research focuses on green hydrogen and sustainable finance and development economics. Please welcome Dr. Christoph.
Thank you. Well, what a pleasure to be here. Thank you so much for the invitation. Distinguished guests, distinguished ladies and gentlemen. It's my third time in Pakistan, and it's every time it's getting better, and it's always a really good experience to be back with friends. I've been working with some of you particularly SDPI, Renewables First, Pakistan-China Institute, ECN, for a couple of years. It's really, I think, an achievement for everybody in the organizing committee to bring us all together for this really interesting and fantastic conference. So really, thank you very much, and congratulations for organizing this. Now, I will share a little bit about the role of China in the regional energy transition. That includes Pakistan, but it includes also a number of Asian countries, because in the end we talk about Asia's energy transition. And just as a background, I think I have a background slide on me. Seems not to work. So I've been working in China for 6 years before moving to Australia last year. I was in Beijing. I was the founding director of the Green Belt and Road Initiative Center, and then I was the founding director of the Green Finance and Development Center at Fudan University. And what kind of really, I think my research was all about, and my work was all about, is to build partnerships with regional organizations like the ones in Pakistan to drive change, particularly around green finance. And green finance is, of course, as a tool that includes the green energy transition. Now I'm in Brisbane, and I know some of you know Brisbane very well. It's one of the most beautiful cities in the world, so I hope many of you will have the opportunity to come to Brisbane very soon, and I'm always happy to expand our cooperation with such fantastic partners as we have here in the room. Okay. Seems to work. A very simple presentation. Where do we need to go? Kind of, that's, I think, the big question. Where's China's contribution in this pathway, and what should we do as the next steps? I think very simple structure. So where are we? So this is the emission trajectory that we've seen across Asia. So you see that's excluding China. Otherwise, it would be too wild. I didn't want to include that there. But the problem is, of course, what you see is that over the last 20 years, we have massive CO2 emission growth. So if we talk about decarbonization, if we talk about addressing climate change, this is what we're having to deal with. And so that's the trajectory. And I even put 2060 here, I believe. It's 2050 or 2060, really doesn't matter. I think the message is we need to act urgently. Time is running out. And actually, we kind of, sometimes I finish with this, but here I want to start with this. There's a good saying, physics is the law, everything else is an opinion. And I just want to highlight this here as well. Climate change, everything that we talk about climate change, these tipping points, it's physics. It's not an opinion. It's just, if we don't deal with it, it's not something that can be reversed very easily. And so we have to keep this in mind. As long as we increase our emissions, we are playing with physics, and we are playing with the fire, literally. And so I think the urgency to act, I think, is in everybody's head, and it's really also good to see all the countries come together. We had the colleague from Azerbaijan speaking as a host of COP this year. We have to come together as one world. It's our world. CO2 emissions actually no boundaries. Different from air pollution. Air pollution is much more local, but CO2 emissions really know no boundaries. It's a global problem. Everybody has to work together. But that's kind of just as a fun. It's a reduction of 83 million tons per year just for Asia. And that is a lot of emissions that we need to reduce. Now, where are we in terms of finance? So this is from the Global Infrastructure Hub, also very focused on Asia. So we have the current investment trends over the next 40 years or until 2040 is about $15 trillion investment. So it's quite substantial actually what we're forecasting in terms of the investments that is available. But it's still about a $3 trillion investment gap across the region. Sounds a lot, it's actually not so much. I think that's really also the hopeful message. $3 trillion investment gap, pretty much at today's rates of the cost. What we've seen is actually an unprecedented decline in the cost of renewable energy, which has made renewable energy so competitive. And so overall, particularly the energy sector, I think the investment gap is actually achievable to address this investment gap. Now, that's a graph that I almost want to kind of put a big question mark, if at best. So where does all the money come from? So that's the IEA predictions. That's also for ASEAN in particular. And you see kind of also here massive investment gaps or kind of investment needs in two different scenarios. So on the left side, you see what we've had between 2016 and 2020. And then you see kind of from 2026 to 2030 that we have to, in this 4-year period, we have to really ramp up investments. And if you want to have a sustainable development scenario, SDS, we have to more than double it. Overall, by the way, if we were to double investments, we would actually reduce electricity costs. So economically, it would make sense even in their scenario. Now, what the colors highlight, and that's where I take some offense with it, is the public finance, the SOE finance, which pretty much stays stagnant. And I enjoyed the governor's speech that we need, of course, more private sector finance. But to be very honest, across Asia, it's not the private sector that can come in so easily. It's the state-owned enterprises. Across all of Asia, state-owned enterprises control the energy system from the generation to the distribution and transmission. So if we are serious about an energy transition in Asia, we have to put much more focus on state-owned enterprises, whether it's in Indonesia, whether it's PLN, whether it's in India, whether it's in Pakistan. State-owned enterprises are actually the dominant force in the energy space. If we forget them, we will not succeed. It's just they're not going to give up power. Very simple. They don't want to lose their power. So if you have to do the green energy transition, we have to really focus much more on the state-owned enterprises. I was invited to talk about China's contribution. I pride myself of having a Chinese last name, Wang, Nedopil Wang. So even though I don't look Chinese, I will try to do my best to speak a little bit about at least China's international role. I don't dare to speak about China's domestic role. So here's over the last 11 years, China's energy finance in the Belt and Road Initiative, particularly in Asia. So Pakistan is, of course, a very important partner for China in the Belt and Road Initiative through the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor. And so we do every 6 months to 12 months, a China Overseas Investment Report focused on the Belt and Road Initiative. And what we've been observing is that the overall share of the green energy in Belt and Road Initiative investments has been increasing. So in 2020, it was the first time that it was more than 50% green energy, so renewable energy, so solar, hydro, and wind. So that was really kind of encouraging. In 2020, we saw then some very big gas deals in the region, but overall the share of green energy engagement has been relatively strong and absolutely increasing. So 2023 was the largest engagement of China in the green energy sector in Asia measured. This compares to a total decline of coal engagement of China, particularly since its announcement in 2021 to not support coal anymore. And what we started doing last year in our analysis as well, is to understand, because energy can be many things. When we talk about gas, it's of course not the electricity sector, but it's exploration. So we kind of started doing a lot more analysis around what part of the energy supply chain is China actually engaging in. And we see that generation has been, like electricity generation, has been a very important kind of target for Chinese overseas engagement, as well as refining. So that's kind of the gas and oil sector. But what we're not seeing enough is transmission, which is very important in order to actually hook up a lot of the green energy generation capacity into the grid. So I think there's possibilities to tweak that and also ask again China for the right investments. China has a lot of technology and capacity in that space. Just because China stopped investing in coal in 2021 doesn't mean that that is a solved problem. The simple truth is China has engaged in about 50 plus gigawatt of coal investments in the region. It is the largest partner in the coal financing over the last years, and that ranges across the different Asian countries. Pakistan, Indonesia, Vietnam are some of the largest destinations for Chinese coal engagement. We've seen overall, on average, 50% of the coal-fired power plants that had been announced have been cancelled, but 50% have still gone ahead. So 56 gigawatts are currently operational and 8 gigawatts are still being constructed. Now, what that means is if we want to decarbonize, it's not just about expanding the green energy. It is also about how do we reduce actual emissions that we see right now. And so here, kind of, you see the cumulative lifetime emissions of Chinese-sponsored coal-fired power plants in Asia, and it's just been rising rapidly. And this is a big sore spot if we are serious about addressing CO2 reduction. So good news, China is engaging more in green energy. Challenge is that there's a lot of CO2 emissions locked in through Chinese coal-fired power plants. What are some of the recommended actions? I don't know how I'm actually doing with the time. I'm sure I'm doing very well. So one of the big ideas I think that we'll discuss also particularly tomorrow is, thank you, is the opportunity for Pakistan and others to finance early coal-fired power plant retirement. And the typical thinking is actually that it's old coal-fired power plants and not young coal-fired power plants that should be retired. The reason is great old coal-fired power plants are already written off. They've made their profits, right? Now, what's interesting is that through simple refinancing, and particularly green refinancing and support with credit enhancement, it is actually the young coal-fired power plants that are more viable to be retired rather than the old ones. So again, it's the young coal-fired power plants that are easier to retire through financing mechanisms than it is the old ones. The simple reason is that most of your cost of running a coal-fired power plant is your financing cost. So if you have 75% debt on your coal-fired power plant, which is the young coal-fired power plant where you still have a lot of debt, on the 75% of debt, you have to pay a lot of interest as a coal-fired power plant owner. So in the first years, as an owner, you're actually not making any profit. All of the money goes to the banks. So if you can reduce the financing cost by 1%, so Pakistan from 18 to 17%, that's when you actually reduce cost of running this coal-fired power plant. And if you reduce cost of the coal-fired power plant, ideally you can retire it 5 to 7 years earlier. Now we looked at a number of different opportunities, also particularly for Pakistan and China, how it can be done. And I'm happy to go through very, very detailed explanations about this. I won't, just because of time. But there are two main mechanisms. Number one is just a refinancing of the coal-fired power plant to retire. So just a retirement, which works with credit enhancement mechanisms from the Chinese side or from international sides. It's careful with China. They are, of course, working with international financial partners, but most likely it's going to be somebody like AIIB or Sinosure for China to credibly engage in, and not the Asian Development Bank that is potentially more hesitant to buy out Chinese coal-fired power plants. But through refinancing, we can provide concessional debt to buy out the existing coal-fired power plants. Similar structure, a little bit more complicated if we want to bundle this buyout with a renewable energy investment. So a sunset and sunrise at the same time. Again, similar, we try to blend finance with support from a concessional financier. Here, a very complicated graph, but I just want you to look, let's see, on the left side, this is an SSRL coal-fired power plant here in Pakistan, 1.3 gigawatts. And you have three different colors. So if you really look at the left side, so you have the PPA, which is the power purchasing agreement. And this 1.3 gigawatt coal-fired power plant, the enterprise value of this under the power purchasing agreement, not even fair valuation. Fair valuation would require a much more cash flow, de facto cash flow analysis. It's about $2.2 billion. It sounds about right. Now, if we were doing a portfolio refinancing or asset refinancing, in our calculation, the worth of this coal-fired power plant would be $2.6 billion while we retire 8 years early. So we're increasing the enterprise value while we retire early through a refinancing mechanism. And if you bundle it with renewables, actually the enterprise value will go up to $4 billion. So this is really, really attractive. These results have been peer reviewed. So it is published in Energy Policy, one of the leading journals in that field. So I think very promising results to also look at really the power of refinancing, particularly for younger coal-fired power plants. Now, one of the really interesting areas, particularly also for Pakistan and other countries in a similar situation, is also to look at debt swaps. So countries with severe sovereign debt issues should also work with China to understand the possibilities of applying debt for sustainable development swaps. China has an agreement now with Egypt, the first country to actually engage in debt swaps, debt for climate swaps. I believe very strongly that Pakistan is in a very good position to also negotiate with China and ask kind of how we can engage in a debt for climate swap in order to reduce the burden of paying the sovereign debt guarantees for the coal-fired power plants, while also ideally expanding the renewable. China would actually benefit in a sense that most of the technology will somehow come from China. So it's an economic boost for China. It helps Pakistan to reduce its own debt burden and therefore, particularly, I think from a balance of payment perspective, also be in a stronger position. So these are also, I think, very live discussions. And it's worth exploring a lot more and also ensuring that the different stakeholders fully understand the opportunities that are involved in this. So that's on the financing side. I think there's two more things that I want to say, which is I think China it can provide for the Asia energy transition. A lot of technical capacity that China has been engaged in, the smart energy system, microgrids as well. And this is something that I think we work together to also build the technical capacity and governance capacity. A big question, and that includes coal-fired power plants. How do we renegotiate existing contracts? What is the governance capacity that we need to renegotiate existing contracts that we have with Chinese? And it's not just Pakistan, it's Indonesia, it's Vietnam, it's many others. So how do we get out of the existing coal-fired power plants to actually provide lower cost electricity for the locals? Financial negotiations And of course, state-owned enterprise governance for green finance. Again, we need to focus much more on state-owned enterprises. We have to recapitalize them and provide financing for them to drive the green energy transition and not be laggards. They will block it otherwise, and they have a lot of power, state-owned enterprises. Here, I want to also share, I think, some hopeful developments. China has engaged in a number, or kind of in the China ecosystem, a number of initiatives have sprung up. The Green Investment Principles, GIP, have been in existence for a couple of years to really drive green finance and green finance capabilities within the Belt and Road Initiative in particular, and that of course includes local banks. And I'm pretty sure that Pakistan is very active in the Green Investment Principles as well. GIFPI was announced last year at the Belt and Road Forum. I think there's still a lot of question marks around GIFPI, what it exactly is. So I think it remains to be seen that the goal is to provide facilities for green energy investments. A new initiative that we just established is the Green Energy Network Asia, that brings together different Asian partners and China, outside of China, to understand how to negotiate with China. What are the right questions to ask? What are the challenges? How do we actually best negotiate a green PPA? So this is a new network established with the two partner countries, Pakistan and Indonesia, that is hosted at Griffith University. And then another initiative that I also want to highlight is the Green CPEC Alliance, which was launched 2 years ago by SDPI, Pakistan China Institute, and I was also involved. So a lot of work, a lot of good standards have been developed there, and a lot of important engagement. Again, very much focused on the China-Pakistan relationship, which can also drive a lot of knowledge for the rest of the region. If you're interested, I'm happy to share with you much of the work that has been published. That includes, of course, the China coal exit. What are the opportunities, financial opportunities for coal phase down in Pakistan and Vietnam? The idea of a managed transition vehicle that is also published. Then sunrise and sundown for Vietnam, Pakistan. And so what is the political economy in these two areas? Reorienting sovereign debt towards nature and SDGs. That is a report published last year together with the UNDP, which focuses on debt swaps, including in Pakistan, where we actually worked with some Pakistani partners as well to understand what are implications and opportunities for debt swaps. Other countries that we included are Laos. And so it is a UNDP report, so you can imagine it's usually these reports require a lot of diplomacy to get them published. But in the end, a very, I think, interesting report. With that, I thank everyone and look forward to many more fruitful discussions, and wish the conference organizers and the conference audience a very, very excellent and successful conference.
Thank you, Dr. Thank you, Dr. Wong, for aptly summing up China's position and role in the regional energy transition. Next, we have Mr. Arturo Tahoop, the Director for Community Resilience at ICSC. With extensive experience in disaster risk reduction and humanitarian work, he previously coordinated and managed humanitarian assistance project during Typhoon Haiyan's response in summer. At ICSC, he leads the ARI Charge Philippines team, focusing on low carbon resilience and energy democracy in surviving communities.
Good morning, everybody. I think it's almost lunch. Okay. I'm Arturo Tahoop. Just call me Uro. My work is really focused on community resilience, whether it's DRR, energy democracy, and renewable energy communities, as well as climate resilience development. My task today is to present the Southeast Asian perspective, right? I'm from the Institute for Climate and Sustainable Cities. It's an NGO based in the Philippines. We work locally with communities, with national government, the DOE and other stakeholders in the government, private sector, and we also work regionally in ASEAN, in the CASE project, and internationally. We have been active in advising the so-called Climate Vulnerable Forum in the Paris Agreement. Okay. So let me just proceed to the most important thing. Okay. This is Southeast Asia, the map. So Southeast Asia is really diverse, right? You have importers of energy and exporters of energy. Wait. If you look at the data, something's wrong with my laptop. It's good that I have my mobile phone. Okay. So if you look at the data, Southeast Asia is one of the most fastest growing regions globally, right? And then in terms of energy, you can see that by 2040, they expect a 60% growth of power, right? And then it's heavily reliant on coal. It's easy to explain because there's Indonesia there and other producers of fossil fuels. However, it has still it has a lot of potential for renewables, ranging from where I come from, the Philippines. There's sun, there's wind. We have one of the biggest geothermal plant in the world, and there's also for wind, there's onshore and offshore, and there's also potential for biomass and ocean tide. Actually, when JICA went to the so-called Haiyan corridor, areas affected by super typhoon Haiyan, one of the proposal of JICA was to set up an ocean thermal plant, right? Harnessing the difference in temperature of surface seawater and water below. That's cool. So because the areas affected by Haiyan is near what we call the Philippine Trench, right? It's deep. So there's deep cold water and hot surface water. So there's a lot of potential in ASEAN. And if you go around ASEAN, in terms of the biggest chunk of contribution to renewable energy, it's actually hydro and biomass to some extent. So if we really want to pursue energy transition in ASEAN, the focus should be solar and wind, the backbone of the renewable energy in ASEAN. So if you look at the data again, it says that the capacity for wind is 6.8, right? Gigawatts, and solar, but only 41 terawatt hours were generated from solar and in Southeast Asia. And the biggest player in solar right now in ASEAN is Vietnam. Look at the big bubbles, right? It's really Vietnam that's at the top of the countries who's producing renewable. Increase in production of wind. There are investors right now from the European countries and as well as solar. However, everything is not, good news in Vietnam. 4 days ago, 2 major RE developers from Europe back out right? Why so? Because the reason to quote these people is it's regulations, right? It's the readiness of the government to ensure that the infrastructure necessary to harness offshore wind is there. We're talking about the ports. We're talking about the assessment really of the areas suitable for offshore and in terms of guarantees and contracts. So it's not always a happy picture for Vietnam. Even though Vietnam right now is number one in the energy transition index or performance in Southeast Asia. Globally, Vietnam is 32nd, right? Followed by Indonesia, followed by, and then at the bottom is the Philippines, where I come from. Okay. So what are the challenges for the energy transition in Southeast Asia? Wait. Just look at the slides because both my laptop and phone did not support me today. Anyway, so one is policy planning and alignment. There's an absence of a long-term policy vision and government ownership. Remember what the first speaker said a while ago. If you look the whole of ASEAN, the energy industry there is really led by the state, right? So if you want to really pursue the energy transition, you have to work with the state energy companies. So you really have to get the buy-in of the state. The Philippines is the only country in ASEAN whose power sector is privatized, right? With the passage of the IPIRA law. Okay. Limited interaction and collaboration. They're working in silos, right? Third is high cost of capital for renewable energy. So that means companies and state enterprises have to be creative to find out how to convince financiers to have a buy-in funding these projects. And this is one of the major problems that we find in the Philippines: weak technological understanding of renewable energy, project-based finance, right? Actually, that's the reason why we're here, right? How to finance RE projects. And the third is the problem with the grid, right? In the Philippines, we're an archipelago, right? It's really difficult to ensure that the grid is there, that we will be able to connect renewable energy projects to the end user. In ASEAN, in countries that's but unfortunately, that will not be possible for the Philippines, right? And PASE lock-in, so that's very clear. Even now, I think it was reduced from 60. Our dependency in coal is 40+%, right? But there's also dependency for other fossil fuels, gas, oil. So that's true in Brunei, in Indonesia. That's why it's really difficult, right, to convince these countries that are exporters of electricity, fossil fuel energy, to really put their weight in adopting renewable energy projects, right? Because, you know, they're dependent on, they've been long dependent on fossil fuel. Capacity building, that's clear. Even in universities, installers have been complaining, PV installers have been complaining, this is the case of the Philippines, right? That there's really a need for solar technicians and engineers, more solar technicians and engineers to ensure that they can build a stable solar technology industry. Without this one, without these people, without this manpower, it's really impossible to accelerate the energy transition. I really don't know what's the story in other countries. And then the policies. But let me proceed here, right? CASE is working a study. I've been working in ICSE is part of CASE, and we're working with other players in the region, mostly NGOs and think tanks, in helping governments, industry accelerate the just energy transition. So our efforts involve research, transparency and mapping, dialogue in an energy sector, technical assistance, and promoting public discourse. So far, we've been focused on 3 countries: Thailand, Indonesia, the Philippines, and Vietnam. It's the ambition to achieve. This is energy transition in Southeast Asia. I will not deep dive into the details, but will show you this one. From World Energy Forum, they made an estimate of the cost of just energy transition projects and programs across sectors and across different timelines, right? So if you look at can you read it, or you have difficulty in viewing the numbers? So there's the PSE, the planned energy scenario. There's the TAS, transformative energy scenario. There's 1.5 scenario, 90% RE, 1.5 scenario, 100% RE. And you can see the investment that is needed to achieve these scenarios. So, for example, solar PV, you need $1.245 billion by 2050. No? Okay. Then I'll go to my country. As I said a while ago, we are really, coal is still king in the Philippines, which was different 15 or 20 years ago when the Philippines energy mix was really dominated by renewables. We're talking about what? Geothermal, the biggest plant in Tongonan, Leyte, and hydro, right? And later on, due to the power crisis and due to the failure of investing more plants, RE plants, in the late 90s, there was really a acceleration of construction of coal plants. So right now, coal rules in the Philippines, right? And if you look at the percentage of the RE, it's just 29.2, right? So what are the challenges in the Philippines? Perception. This is common from the government bureaucrats, from the politicians, down to the communities. The misconception that RE is expensive, RE is unreliable. I think it was president, former president already died, who said in his speech that how can we rely on electricity, on solar, if it's already nighttime and if it rains, no. However, study shows that with the adoption of the FIT, right, FIT, the consumers really benefited from low cost of energy, right? The FIT. And if you go to my focus areas, the frontline communities, the off-grid areas, right? It's really clear that it's better for them to depend on solar, hybrid, rather than depend on diesel fuel, which is really hitting the heavens right now in terms of prices. And then the issue of accountability. If you read the energy history of the Philippines, we have already put into place laws and policies way back late 90s, 20s, the Renewable Energy Law, the EPIRA Law. No, there are really the framework for the adoption of RE was already there. But the problem is the implementation, right? There are many initiatives, the green energy auction program, the expanded rooftop solar, the net metering, etc., etc. It took years for these laws to have implemented guidelines. The good thing is right now, they're all in place, right? Net metering, expanded rooftop solar, the GEOP, propagating offshore and onshore wind, right? Then the power structure. For too long, the Philippines has been, the power sector was organized in a centralized power structure dependent on coal as base load. Now, our country is an archipelago, right? If you're gonna connect the whole archipelago, 3,700 plus islands, into a single grid, that's really stupid, right? Because the best approach is really decentralized, flexible energy. Instead of relying on 4 or 5 big coal plants, you establish power stations using solar, wind, hydro, geothermal in the different regional centers. And the next problem is in our off-grid areas, the small islands, they're all dependent on diesel generators, right? And we subsidize the cost of operation, or the true cost of operation of these generators through the universal charge for missionary electrification. Every consumer who's connected to the grid has to pay. And the bulk of the subsidy is for diesel, which is very expensive right now. So the strategy with the passage of the mini-grid law is really to encourage investors to set up hybrid solar, hybrid biogas, hybrid wind. No, we will not throw to the oceans the diesel, but it will remain as backup. The key there is investors who want to, pump prime, to put money to support the small island grids, which have a lot of business potential in terms of fishing, because we're the Pacific Tuna Highway and other resources. And last one is investment, right? The reason coal is making money in the Philippines is because of the automatic pass-through costs, right? Whatever the increases in imported oil, etc., is passed on to the consumers. There's no risk for the investors. No, it's even more than the sovereign fund, right? They just easily pass on to the community. If we want to encourage investments, there should be efforts to reduce this, and this is already happening. And here, so there's already a moratorium on coal right now, so that's good. And there's also this investments in renewable, mostly solar and wind. And the energy plan, Philippine Energy Plan, has been ambitious, unlike previously before. And one of the most lauded efforts right now is to allow 100% ownership of power companies in the Philippines, to really ensure that there will be investment in the power sector, particularly RE. And the market policies that had taken too long to be implemented is already in place, and they're already best practices. And the era of diesel-powered small islands has ended. Government has decided to really buy no more diesel plants, but invest on hybrid grids, mini grids, microgrids in small islands. And lastly is the constituency of the just energy transition in the Philippines is growing. So there's pressure for government, for the private sector to really make bold and ambitious targets to achieve the energy transition in the Philippines. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Tahoop, for enlightening us with such crucial insights from the Southeast Asian region. Next, we have Dr. Khalid Walid. He is a research fellow at the Sustainable Development Policy Institute and holds a PhD in energy economics with over 10 years of experience in Pakistan's energy sector. His expertise include energy markets, energy poverty, energy transition, carbon markets, and econometrics.
Yeah, thank you so much, Amara, for the introduction. And thank you so much, worthy distinguished speakers who have spoken before me. If a Chinese expert on energy and Philippines expert on energy has spoken before you, your half job is done if you are from Pakistan, because they share lots and lots of insights that are similar to Pakistan, particularly in Philippines. So this is progress and challenges in energy transition in Pakistan. It would be more challenges, I would say less progress, but still it is on optimistic note. Just the overview of Pakistan's energy sector, the installed capacity of Pakistan has increased by about 12% to about 45,000 megawatts. Pakistan's electricity generation has declined around 10% in fiscal year 23. The fossil fuels account for about 52% of total electricity generation in Pakistan. On positive note, the VRE installed capacity has increased to about 6,000 plus megawatts in fiscal year 23 from 3,000 plus megawatts in fiscal year 18. So still Pakistan is a fossil fuel dominant economy, but we see optimistic picture on horizon if Pakistan can sort of integrate energy, economy, and environment into one equation. This is one equation I propose for Pakistani policymakers that integrate these three E's of Pakistan: economy, energy, environment. Then we can have this holistic, integrated sort of solution for Pakistan. So, okay, if you break down these fossil fuels, this about 52% of generation, you'll see that the major fuel in Pakistan are RLNG, imported coal, coal, and this pie chart is from June 2024. You can clearly see that coal is dominating, and RLNG is about 43% because of this demand, peak demand issue, where we need to run these RLNG plants to meet our summer demand. Pakistan's natural gas reserves, they are depleting. When they are depleting, we need to sort of fill in for that gap as well. In Pakistan, there is also a moratorium on coal as well as Philippines. However, the government is building these committed coal plants, and there are some plans which are worrisome for Pakistan if you take energy transition and climate agenda into account, that the government wants to convert imported coal plants to the local coal, which might not be suitable for Pakistan's in terms of climate change and in terms of Pakistan's economy. I would explain it a bit later in my slides. Another phenomenon in Pakistan is that there is consumption chirality. Chirality is a concept in chemistry where two phenomena, they are same, but they are opposite to each other, just like your hands. If you see this graph, you'll see that the industry consumption in Pakistan is about 25% in total electricity consumption. In China, it is 49%. And if you compare it with residential consumption, you'll see this chiral effect, where Pakistan has this 48% consumption gone into residential sector, and industries ratio is a bit low. And in China, the residential share is 17%. So they are using their energies to be a productive economy for their industries, whereas we are using our energies into our residential sector, which need to be addressed as well. So again, right now in Pakistan, Pakistan was under a pre-feasibility study of Asian Development Bank's ETM, which was stopped in this government. There is more focus on hydro and nuclear, and again to build capacity, which might hurt Pakistan's this energy transition agenda. And then again, no just energy transition partnership investment plan in the focus, and lastly, conversion to third coal. These four things are very worrisome for Pakistan if you sort of bring into account the energy transition and the foreseeable future of Pakistan. So challenges in energy transition. I always say this is a planning crisis. Pakistan has this management crisis in energy. If you recall the crisis of 2007, 2008, at that time, there was accessibility crisis. There was load shedding of 18 to 20 hours. We solved that crisis by bringing another crisis to the equation. And now we are facing affordability crisis because of the solution that was proposed to solve this accessibility crisis. And how we are solving this affordability crisis in Pakistan now, we are exploring solutions into third coal, which might again delve Pakistan into another crisis, and that would be a sustainability crisis, because if there is more fossil fuels in the mix in the national grid, that might hurt Pakistan's exports and Pakistan's trade in the future. Second problem, obviously, I would resonate the words of Mr. Arturo that there are financial challenges as well, because renewable energy transition, it has high capital cost, almost non-existent investment climate in Pakistan, financial instabilities, including circular debt, non-existence of investment climate again. Okay. So these are the requirements, by the way. 50 billion are needed by 2030, 80 billion needed by 2040, 20 billion are needed to just update this transmission system in Pakistan if we want to integrate more and more VRE, and 30 billion is the figure if we want to have full coal phase out in Pakistan. Okay, next challenge in Pakistan is this transmission system, that is the north to south dilemma in Pakistan. If you see, south consumes about 27,000 plus gigawatt hours of electricity. Center consumes about 71,000 plus gigawatt of electricity, and North consumes about 24,000 plus gigawatt of electricity. Now, if you combine South and North together, still the center would be consuming more electricity. But our power plants, the cheaper power plants, if they are Therkol, the wind corridor in South and hydro in North, now we have to transmit all this electricity generated from South to center and North to center. So maybe energy transition in Pakistan, including the distributed generation systems, that might provide some sort of answer for Pakistan's energy crisis and to solve this transmission conundrum in Pakistan as well. So again, I'm looking towards Dr. Fayaz because he is the one who sort of introduced this idea, the anomaly between winter load and summer load. In winter, we have this about 12,000 megawatts of computer demand, and it goes up to about 30,000 megawatts in summer. So this delta of 16,000 megawatts, this is the cooling load in Pakistan, and our capacity expansion is planned on this load. So which is unsustainable in Pakistan. We need to sort of solve this if we want to have a meaningful energy transition in Pakistan as well. Another challenge, that is this young coal fleet in Pakistan, particularly those installed under CPEC. You can clearly see that the remaining PPA limit is on average about 25 to 27 years if we want a natural retirement. So we need to look into some sort of economically feasible early retirement of these coal plants, which might be suitable for economy as well, because the next challenge is the energy economics challenge in Pakistan. The capacity charges associated with these coal plants, they are way higher than the other fuels if you look at this graph, because these are indexed with dollars, these are indexed with interest rate, these are indexed with inflation rates, and God knows what. So if we want to sort of contain our energy economic situation, we need to find out solution into from energy transition mechanisms, from energy transition initiatives, so that we can solve again this 3E crisis of Pakistan. Again, a political economy, Therkol is presented as a solution, which is a very short-sighted one. There is a provincial wealth, and we need to sort of find the alternatives as well. There is affordability versus sustainability debate. There is capacity expansion. In Pakistan, power plants are built just to sort of build a political capital. We have installed so many capacity, not following the rule, just a political discretion. So that should be addressed as well. Again, there is a trust deficit between the players involved in this energy sector. Lastly, the misalignment of ministerial goals. If you see the goals of climate change, Ministry of Climate Change, you'll see the increased ambition, need for climate action. But if you see the goals of Ministry of Energy, Power Division, you'll see that the coal would be focused and fossil fuel would be a focus, and energy transition would be on a very short side. So we need to sort of cater for that as well. Progress in terms of Pakistan, in terms of energy transition, is that we sort of, there is an economic case for Pakistan if we want to get into this energy transition initiatives. Provincial governments are very supportive of renewable energy, VRE transition in Pakistan. There is progress towards market liberalization in terms of CTBCM, where the bilateral contracts can be started. There is a solar boom in Pakistan as well. Fizan is sitting there. He has this detailed study on solar boom in Pakistan with AIFA. So another positive sign, but maybe not good for national grid of Pakistan, but still in the VRE space and in the off-grid solar, that would count as a good sign. Integrated approach, again, the reforms in anti-DC and energy sector. Now we have IGSAP plus TSAP, which is a transmission expansion plan as well. So we need to sort of integrate these plans with climate change goals as well, keeping the long-term horizon in mind. In that way, we can sort of achieve this holistic or whole of sector or whole of economy approach to solve this conundrum. And lastly, there is an authority known as Climate Change Authority, which is almost functional, operational in Pakistan. Kudos to Supreme Court of Pakistan as well, who has operationalized this authority. This authority has been mandated, and I hope that this mandate would be operationalized as well to sort of develop these plans for renewable energy and for energy transition as well. Lastly, this is a new initiative by European Union. It is known as CBAM, Carbon Border Adjustment Mechanism. What CBAM sort of highlights or compels the economies, those economies who are exporting to European Union, they would be bound by 2030 for carbon accounting. If there is high intensity of carbon in their exports, EU is going to tax those commodities, particularly from South Asia, from Southeast Asia, because the carbon intensity is very high in there. So if Pakistan, particularly the textile sector of Pakistan, if they use electricity from national grid, they would be charged about 1.4 times as compared to the companies operating in EU. If you see these graphs, this is the data from World Bank's CBAM exposure, which means that Pakistan's grid is about 1.4 times more carbon intensive as compared to EU's grid. So if by 2030 we did not sort of plan this right, we are going to suffer in terms of reducing trade, and the companies, industries, particularly textile industries, they would want to leave the grid and they would have their own clean energy captive plants, which would again sort of create this conundrum for national grid in Pakistan, where the demand would decrease and demand would decrease demand would sort of again start this debate around the capacity charges and increase electricity tariff. So we need to sort of have this energy transition. We need to early retire these fossil fuel plants, not just on environmental grounds or climate change grounds, on the economics as well, on the trade as well, so that we can sort of increase our export competitiveness in that regard as well. So what is the way forward for Pakistan? So we need to sort of have this a regional just energy transition working group, particularly focusing on just energy transition partnerships, ETMs, and this upcoming initiative of coal to clean credit initiatives, where carbon markets are being used to kickstart this early retirement debate. Because if this initiative is started and get operationalized, Pakistan would be an ideal sort of candidate for this initiative, because coal to clean credit initiative, the more younger your coal plants are, the more carbon credits they get if you early retire those plants. So Pakistan have this younger fleet of coal plants, so we can sort of utilize this initiative as well. So we can have this working group that can carve out the modalities around these initiatives as well. We need to push for, and we are pushing from the platform of our equation for a national coal retirement plan, national carbon pricing alliance that may be established, and it is a P2X alliance where we need to sort of couple our power sector with other sectors, particularly with P2H, power to hydrogen, particularly in Thatta, where our wind generation is curtailed because of evacuation issues. So at that time, we can generate hydrogen from that wind, and then we can have this capacity building hub for industrial growth powered by renewable energy, particularly if we want to solve this CBAM regime. We need to formulate integrated plan for new energy vehicles and their indigenization, obviously more development finance for off-grid solutions, and more technical assistance on on-ground systems. And lastly, as SDPI, Sustainable Development Policy Institute, we always advocate for a charter that is economy, energy, environment. It should be a apolitical thing, which should have consistency, persistence of policies through a homegrown agenda based on international best practices. This could solve Pakistan's, again, I would say, energy, economy, and environment conundrum through energy transition in Pakistan. With this, thank you so much, everyone. Looking forward to it.
Thank you, Dr. Khalid, for your valuable insights. May I please request you to take a seat on stage? And I would also request rest of the speakers of this plenary session to please join us on stage so that we can have our question and answer session. This session would be moderated by Dr. Naveed Arshad, who is Director, Lums Energy Institute. Over to you, Dr. Naveed.
What a wonderful overview of Asia's energy situation, starting from India and going to Southeast Asia, to Philippines, and back to Pakistan. So we have about 16 minutes for question answers. I will strictly keep this time for question answer. I would request that if you have a question, please raise your hand. Keep your questions to short, crisp, and to the point so that we can maximize the time given to our speakers for answering those questions. So please raise your hand if you have a question, and our team will bring a mic to you. So there is a question here. Mic zara le jayenge. Please, and also please tell us that your name, your organization, and who the question is directed to.
Hello, my name is Azam Akram. I represent Pakistan LNG Limited. My question is from Dr. Wong. You talked about contracts renegotiating. So now the notion in Pakistan is that if you go for a contract renegotiation, that would hurt the credibility of the state. So are there any successful examples of any countries that successfully renegotiated their contracts with China? Thank you.
Thanks for the question. So 2 points to that question. Number one, the current situation of the payment to the Chinese as part of your coal-fired power plants are also potentially undermining the credibility of Pakistan, because there are unpaid fees and unpaid interest payments. So the current situation is not kind of the best situation for anyone involved. So both on the Pakistani side and of course for the Chinese, because they want their money. So having a renegotiation potentially actually saves a lot of face and saves a lot of headaches for everyone. So then the question is, are there successful cases for renegotiation? And yes, all around the world, renegotiation is part of many projects. I think the biggest renegotiation was between the Chinese and the Malaysians for the railway project, which really reduced the cost by 30% and very much changed in terms of the contract. So renegotiation is possible. The question is, do you have a strategy and a good position to offer the Chinese as well? And again, I think with this mixture of early retirement plus renewables, where China potentially benefits from on both sides and Pakistan benefits, I think that provides such a clear position if it's properly developed.
G, the other question here, please.
The name is Navi Siddiq. I am from DICE Foundation, team leader. Question is to Khalid Saab. How can affordability and packing up our coal fleet go together without causing more and more bump to what we already are having?
Thank you so much, Naveed Saab. Your question is very rightly put. We need to sort of decide between a short-term affordability and a long-term affordability. Back in 2007, 2000 again, we planned for a short-term accessibility solution in terms of IPPs. and that policy, with its all wrongs, have created more crisis for Pakistan in terms of now the affordability. And again, we are solving this affordability crisis with another maybe a wrong narrative, as per my opinion. So we need to balance this out, and we need to have this cost and benefit analysis in terms of a long-term horizon for Pakistan's economy, Pakistan's consumers. Again, if we have this short-sighted solution, it would going to hurt Pakistan in long term. So any government, they should sort of have this a long-term horizon policy making, integrated policy making, where policies, they are complementing other sectors as well, not just the electricity sector. And again, if you are targeting affordability of residential consumers for a very short-term horizon, it will cost Pakistan's economy. So we need to have these integrated solutions, long-term solutions, where we have structural reforms in the sector, not these myopic or short-sighted ones.
Thank you. Further questions? See, there's a question at the front.
Thank you very much. This is a question for Dr. Christoph. There's some work that the organization that I work for is doing. My name is Hassim. I work at Climate Policy Initiative on the Clean to Coal Credit Initiative, and this is with the Rockefeller Foundation and the U.S. Climate Envoy, Senator John Kerry. We're trying to develop a methodology for the generation of carbon credits with the early retirement of coal-fired power plants, with the pilot expected to be in Indonesia in a few years. One of the core principles of that methodology is the matching principle. So with the funds that you generate, you have to invest them in the generation of renewable energy. And I was wondering how you address that under the various financial instruments that you've proposed, given Pakistan, countries like Pakistan have seen 10% decline in generation in 2023. Thank you.
Congratulations for all the great work that CPI is doing, and I think very, very important. In our calculations, we did not focus on potential returns from carbon credits. I think the most advanced carbon credit mechanism right now is from the Monetary Authority of Singapore, is Traction. They also just shared a progress report at the New York Climate Week. So very similar principles that you, through the avoidance of greenhouse gas emissions from the early retirement of coal-fired power plant owners will get paid out, and they're really trying to, or actually really making progress and applying this methodology in the Philippines. So I think you can talk more about this in the Philippines. But the Asian coal-fired power plant has already agreed to retire early, I think by 2040, just through refinancing. So it's a retirement possible kind of through the mechanisms that we are suggesting. And now they're evaluating to actually retire 10 years earlier by 2030 through the application of carbon credits. So I think it is additive and definitely extremely important to also use this tool. The problem with carbon credits at this point is that they are conceptual. We don't have them yet. We don't have all the mechanisms yet, to value them in terms of the financial value, but also in the emission value. What we have though at hand, which actually works already, is a refinancing. So again, it's not to say one or the other. Ideally, we combine them and we do whatever is possible as fast as we can.
There's a question.
Hello. In the Philippines, there's a new initiative right now by the Ayalas, one of the top player in the power industry. It's the first ever market-based energy transition mechanism. Wherein the Ayalas, who own a big coal plant, will retire the coal plant and financing will be given by 2 local banks and government, the GSIS. So we're still looking at the features and hope that it will succeed, because it would be another pathway for companies involved in producing coal, right? Electricity from coal to make the ship retire their aging plants and be free from what we were saying as stranded assets. So let us see what will happen to this first private market-based energy transition mechanism.
Thank you. Ji, question.
So my name is Farhaj Afajisti from Texland Private Limited. My question is for Suresh ji from India. As Suresh ji is pointing out the potential of triple nuclear energy and as well as its positive environmental impacts. So my question is, what should be the deliverables for Pakistan on such an ambitious goal?
Mr.
Could you hear
Suresh,
me?
have you heard the question?
Thank you. Can you repeat?
So can you repeat
Can you
the question?
Sir,
repeat the question?
sir, as you pointing out the potential of triple nuclear energy as well as its positive environmental impacts. So could you tell me what should be the deliverables for Pakistan on such an ambitious goal?
So what should be the lessons for Pakistan for the triple nuclear energy that India is planning?
See, nuclear energy, if you are talking of nuclear energy, it is now considered as, zero emission electricity generation technology. And many countries are now looking back to nuclear energy again to generate electricity for peaceful work. And we are also looking at nuclear energy, but percentage of nuclear contribution will still be very, very less, maybe less than 10%, even around 2040 or so. Currently, it is hardly 3% or so. The one way I was going through the discussions, I was listening. Since you have a lot of coal power plants which are young age, do they have, can they be integrated with carbon capture and sequestration technologies to reduce the emissions apart from the normal, emission reduction measures or improving energy efficiency, etc. So that I think I have answered the question, but
Okay, thank you. There's one, I will have the last question here. Gentleman in the 4th row, 5th row.
Ji, thank you very much. Asif Said from Atlas Group, and my question is for Dr. Khalid. Dr. Saab, as you know that Pakistan has an installed capacity of around 46,000, 45,000 megawatt, and the demand nowadays is around 23,000 megawatts. And one of the reason of the decline in demand is installation of solar panels at homes, especially, and some of the industrial sectors. Now there is another problem of the capacity payments. Now we know that with the decrease in demand, the capacity payments increase proportionately. So while we are talking about the energy transition and we are talking about the solar, so how do you see the problem can be solved? If we install the solar panels, it will in turn increase the capacity payments of the existing customers. So how do you see this? Thank you very much.
Well, thank you so much for the question. Again, Pakistan has this contrary trend in the world where residential demand is very high as compared to the industrial demand. Government should treat rooftop solars and off-grid solar as a tool to shift this demand from residential consumers to industrial consumers so that we have this productive economy going on in Pakistan. One way to do that is maybe providing subsidies to fossil fuel. Instead of that, maybe government can subsidize solar panels for those residential consumers which are consuming about 200 units or less. They are protected consumers, and they are about 54% in Pakistan, by the way, in terms of total consumers. So maybe these rooftop solars can be an effective tool for Pakistan's transition from a consumptive electricity economy to a productive economy that would not only solve Pakistan's energy sector crisis, but also Pakistan's economic crisis, because if there is more industrial demand and more industries are connected to the grid, there would be exports in Pakistan, interest rates would come down, exchange rate would be stable. But for that, we need to plan for a long-term horizon, because there are climate regulations coming up, particularly in EU, USA, and this would start a climate war between China and EU and USA, and China would come up with their own climate regulations, and that would make international trade complex in that regard. So if we are planning for a productive economy, we need to invest on energy transition, and we need to invest on national grid being converted on renewables. That would again include transmission side as well. We need to invest on that as well. But the solution is that we need to be more productive economy, and we need to bring more industrial demand to the grid powered by renewable energy. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So with this, we'll thank our panelists, speakers from this session, and thank you very much. Just as a side note, at LUMS Energy Institute, we have a number of projects going on in solving these problems that we are seeing today. How to manage solar, how to have wireless microgrids, DC microgrids, and others, so that we can meet the generation needs of customers that are 203 unit. And our website, new website is up, lei.lums.edu.pk, so you can have a look at it, a number of projects that we are doing here. Thank you very much, and we'll now transition to the keynote speech by our keynote speaker, and I'll ask you to please introduce. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Naveed. Ladies and gentlemen, next we have our keynote address on Global Landscape of Climate Finance 2023 with highlights for Asian region. Mr. Haitham Azhar would be delivering this keynote address. He is an analyst at Climate Policy Initiative, focusing on blended finance, climate risk management, and developing impact metrics for adaptation investments. Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Haitham Azhar.
Thank you. Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here. And it's always very difficult to speak right before lunch. So I am going to try and keep this as short as I can. The last time I was here was in 2016 when can I get the presentation taken? Thank you. And is it good to go? I don't see the presentation. So the last time I was here was in 2016 when I attended the LUMS Model UN Information room from this side of the aisle. My name is Haitham. I work with the innovative finance programs at CPI. If you're not familiar with CPI, we are an analysis and advisory organization with deep expertise in finance and policy. We work with governments, financial institutions, businesses, to drive economic growth while addressing climate change. We have 7 offices around the world in Brazil, India, Indonesia, the US, and the UK. I'm based in the UK. And we've recently opened an office in South Africa. So I'm happy to provide insights from our 2023 Global Landscape of Climate Finance with specific insights for Asia. As with most things in life, there is good news and bad news. You'll soon hear that we hit the first $1 trillion milestone in climate finance flows in 2023. However, our estimated needs are 5 times higher than that. In the meantime, 2023 has been a year where the world broke all-time heat records. Climate change is not in the future anymore. It is here, it is now. And I think that is something that the speakers before me have expressed. Our findings indicate that there's an urgent need to work towards mobilizing finance in regions where capital is lacking, particularly in Asia, discounting China, as well as sectors where the progress is lacking to meet our climate targets. So moving on. Landscape has the most comprehensive information available about the scale, key actors, instruments, recipients, and uses of finance supporting climate change mitigation and adaptation in 2021 and 2022. We started this work back in 2010, and now we have over a decade of experience in tracking the global flows of climate finance. Previous editions of the report have served as the basis for the IPCC report on climate finance and the UNFCCC biennial assessment and overview of climate finance flows, as well as background for a lot of the work that the G7 and the G20 do on climate finance. So let's jump right in. I'm going to talk about some key findings. So the average annual climate finance flows, as I mentioned before, reached almost $1.3 trillion, which means it nearly doubled compared to 4 years ago. So we've seen a lot of progress. This large uptake was primarily driven by an acceleration in mitigation finance by $440 billion annual average in 2019 and 2020. The remainder of the growth stems from methodological improvements and new data sources, resulting in additional finance flows of $173 billion. And improved data on climate finance is also good news. A quick clarification on what we track and what we don't track. It's very important to understand what I'm about to speak on. So our analysis covers new annual primary finance flows into climate mitigation and adaptation interventions. It means we really focus on real economy change, on the ground climate investment at the project level, like building renewable energy plants that we've been talking about, or building the adaptive capacity of local communities. So we don't track a transfer of funds in the financial market that don't yet result in real economy activities. And we take due care in our methodology that has been carefully developed over the past decade, and we aim for a now non-double counted number. So increase of finance is great news. However, there's still a significant gap between the current flows and what's needed for a low carbon and climate resilient development. And this graph here depicts a reality check on where we should be headed. At least $5.9 trillion in annual investment is required by 2030, and the figure is close to $9 trillion in the average scenario. Let's put the trillions of dollars into perspective. In other words, how does this compare to other things that we like to spend our finite resources on? $1.3 trillion in climate investment that we've tracked is about 1% of global GDP. In 2022, public sector alone spent twice the size of climate finance in military expenditure. And with the wars in Ukraine and Palestine, that number is likely to grow. We spend over $1 trillion in direct subsidies to fossil fuels and end up spending an additional $5 to $6 trillion in implicit subsidies. So the money is clearly there, but the ambition and financial engineering that is required to deploy it is certainly lacking. On the other hand, delaying climate action and failing to keep the world on a 1.5-degree trajectory will result in significantly higher costs down the line. And I couldn't emphasize this point enough. Climate change impacts, such as increasing temperatures, rising sea levels, and more frequent extreme weather events, as we've seen in Pakistan,
over the past 2 to 3 years will result in labor losses, reduced agricultural yields, global tourism, as well as damage to assets, capital, and productive land. Various studies suggest that under current policies, warming will exceed 3 degrees, leading to macroeconomic losses of at least 18% of the global GDP by 2050 and 20% by the year 2100. However, these are likely to be dramatic underestimates, since they fail to capture costs related to biodiversity loss, stranded assets, and broader social issues. Overall, the projected social and economic costs of a warming world will far outstrip those of the transition that we've been discussing today. And the costs of inaction will rise the longer we delay. So you'll see here on the right-hand side, your left, that the levels needed by 2050, so the $266 trillion that we need cumulatively, will lead to a considerable reduction in social and economic losses by the year 2100 at USD 1,266 trillions compared to the business as usual scenario. So in other words, sticking to the business as usual scenario would create more than double the losses of a 1.5 degree scenario. What exactly does the landscape track? So I know this is a very daunting diagram to read, and I apologize that the numbers are very small, but this is publicly available. So I'm happy to, you can come to me, after, during lunch perhaps, and I'm happy to share the report. So let me just provide you an overview of, what this diagram is showing. It's a snapshot of climate finance flows through the life cycle. So as you see on the left-hand side, capital sources and intermediaries are categorized into private and public, which are then further broken down by categories such as commercial finance institutions, corporations, government actors, or multilateral climate funds. Next, we see the instruments that are being used to raise finance, such as debt and equity, and we also include grants. Every financial flow is broken into mitigation, adaptation, and dual benefits finance. Dual benefits projects target both mitigation and adaptation objectives. Finally, on the right-hand side, the Sankey concludes in the economic sectors where the finance is flowing to, such as renewable energy, transport, agriculture, and land use. So I won't bore you to sleep by quoting the figures on the screen. This diagram is publicly available, as I mentioned, so feel free to go through it in greater detail and come and talk to me after. Also, don't want to keep you waiting for lunch for too long. So let's look at the public and private finance flows in more detail. So the overall share of tracked climate finance provided by public sources are now slightly more than half of the total. We need to get private finance going to climate mitigation and adaptation activities and hit the road running. DFIs have continued to provide the majority of public finance, including national DFIs, contributing $238 billion annually, followed by state-owned entities and government expenditure. On to private finance, private actors provided $625 billion per year during the 2-year period. Mainly commercial finance institutions, corporations, households are the largest investors, as these are actors that directly engage with the real economy activities. So let's talk about climate mitigation finance specifically. As we can see from the graph on the screen, mitigation continues to attract almost all climate finance, receiving, in fact, more than 90% of the total, and leaving adaptation and dual benefits far behind. Mitigation projects in the energy and transport sector alone were responsible for 2/3 of climate finance flows in 2021 and 2022. And this is particularly concerning for climate vulnerable countries in Asia, such as Pakistan and Bangladesh, that are already dealing with the very worst impacts of climate change. Mitigation also seems to be attracting virtually all climate finance coming from the private sector. That's in the orange in the graph. So while adaptation and to a lesser extent dual benefits projects remain a prerogative of the public sector. Specifically in 2021-2022, annual mitigation finance reached 1.2 trillion out of the 1.3 trillion total, growing 60% to the previous biennium. This is an all-time high for mitigation finance, and one that really drove the major increase that we've seen in total climate finance flows. This increase was driven primarily by investments in renewable energy and electric vehicles in East Asia, Europe, and Latin America. I am going to skip the slide because we are short on time. So let's talk about adaptation finance, which reached $63 billion in 2021-2022, as a record high in absolute terms. However, a more modest growth rate was observed compared with the last landscape, and adaptation accounts for only 5% of the global total overall. So as you can see in the Sankey here, adaptation finance was largely channeled as debt, with the emphasis on project level market debt, and was heavily distributed between water and wastewater sectors and the so-called other cross-sectoral solutions, which include investments in early warning systems and policy and capacity building. Tracked adaptation finance remains dominated by public actors who contributed 98% of the total, with DFIs therein providing most of the funding. And this reflects a genuine drive by these public institutions to avoid or minimize the adverse impacts of climate change, but also the issues we face with monitoring adaptation finance in and from the private sector. So, as you can see on the slide here, CPI estimates that developing countries alone need $212 billion per year in adaptation finance up to 2030, and then $239 billion annually between 2031 and 2050. So, adaptation finance needs are approximately 3.5 times higher than the tracked global total for developing countries alone. So let's talk about geographies. Returning to the global picture, the geographic distribution of all climate finance, we see that East Asia and Pacific continues to lead as the highest recipient and/or sources of funding, followed by Western Europe, the US, and Canada. Indeed, together, these three regions account for 84% of total global climate finance. You can also see here that public-private splits per region, which can vary substantially, for example, with the dominance of private capital in Oceania compared to the importance of public investment in sub-Saharan Africa. It's very critical to note that the need for climate finance in South Asia is far greater than the flows that you are seeing here. Public finance was the main source of climate finance for most sub-regions in Asia and the Pacific, except South Asia, which relied almost equally on private finance. And this is good news, and it's partially bad news. The good news is that we are going towards a low carbon transition, mainly through the deployment of renewable energy assets such as hydro dams and residential solar. The bad news is, for the projects or technologies that are less bankable, particularly on the adaptation side, which is a beast of a problem that we need to solve, many countries in Asia are not very well positioned to access international climate finance, primarily due to issues pertaining to governance. Pakistan is a glowing example where concerns around corruption and inability to meet minimum fiduciary standards of the multilateral climate funds keeps finance from flowing into the country. And international private investment is stifled. And that is mainly a consequence of political and economic risk. And one of the things that I find really fascinating is that micro risks or risks at the project level are quite similar across the global north and the global south countries. Macro risks, such as political and economic risk, is the real differentiator. So, with the 1 minute that I have remaining, let's talk about recommendations. What can we do? Firstly, to help Asia, we need big transformations in the global financial system. And this is something that is gaining traction because multilaterals like the ADB and the World Bank are uniquely positioned to take more risk, channel innovative finance, and leverage concessional finance to expand private flows. There are three things that we can do here. We can increase the focus on country sector platforms, moving away from the current project by project approach. Number two, we can deploy at scale risk-sharing instruments to catalyze private capital and to address cost of capital, including through expanded and new guarantee products, mechanisms to address exchange rate risks, currency risk, and increase local currency finance. Number three, a business model overhaul of the World Bank and other multilaterals. And this is something that Ajay Banga was hired to do and speaks frequently about. So we want the MDBs to become mobilizers in chief. We want the standardization of multiple processes, balance sheet optimization through a new originate to distribute model through securitization instruments, eligibility for concessional finance, cross-country data sharing, and a response that meets the needs of the current poly crisis that we face. Second, we need to bridge climate and development needs. So here, we need to harness synergies between development and climate action, because climate change and development agendas are strongly interconnected and can deliver co-benefits for nature, public health, energy access, energy and water security, food systems, and gender equality, among others. Third, we need to mobilize domestic capital. And this is something that China has done fascinatingly well. We will talk about China today. In addition to clear and ambitious policy frameworks, this can be achieved by supporting capacity building of domestic finance institutions, funding needs assessment, and creating readiness assessments roadmaps, expanding project facilitation and technical support, and advancing monitoring, reporting, and verification systems. And finally, we need to improve data monitoring. High quality climate finance data is crucial to understand investment gaps, where money needs to go in the global economy, particularly in Asia. Building effective solutions, informing investors, and measuring collective progress. Despite advancing data efforts for more than a decade now, we started this work back in 2010, pervasive data gaps across actors and sectors still exist. And it is not easy to put together the data that we presented to you because they're not standardized. There are various definitions, and frankly, nobody has any obligation to report on climate finance, including domestic public budgets and private finance, which is not ideal, and it makes our lives at CPI all the more difficult. So I'll stop complaining now. Thank you for your attentions. I'm happy to take questions, but I understand that I may have eaten into that time now. So also happy to just break for lunch. I'll defer to the moderator. Do questions or should we break for lunch? Let's do it. That sounds good. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Azhar, for being mindful of our lunch time. So we'll just go for lunch now, and I'll announce the venue in a while, but let me just chalk out the next steps. So we will have 2 parallel sessions, as Mustafa mentioned at the start. That will be followed by a Q&A session. So first parallel session will be on financing energy transition in Asia, challenges and opportunities, that will be held within this room. And the second one is role of energy efficiency and conservation in driving clean energy transition. And that will be held in the room right across the hall. So our guests, please feel free to come back to whichever room and whichever thematic area you prefer. The lunch is being served at the executive dining hall. So I'll just give you all a bit of directions. So when you leave this building, you have to take a right turn and then a left, and then another right turn. It's the executive dining hall. Our banners and our ushers will guide you. And if you still have trouble, you can come find one of us. Thank you, everyone. Let's reconvene at 1:45.